Would you like to discover some great new tasting tips? How about some different food and wine pairings that you should try? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have dinner with some winemaking celebrities? Well, you're going to get all of those tips and more this evening with my wonderful guest, Scott Greenberg, and I'm going to introduce him in a moment. All right, so if you're watching this on the replay, please, in the comments, type replay. Where are you logging in from? And of course, if you're joining us here live this evening, let me know that. What's in your glass? Where are you logging in from? What's the weather like? You've just joined us in one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers on the internet. We gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and I offer popular online wine and food pairing courses. So now I want to let you know that before I introduce our guest, I would love for you to share this video out to your friends, your wine-loving friends and family. Let them know this is going on. Even if they catch it on the replay, that's just fine. All right, so back to our guest. Scott Greenberg is also known as the Vine Guy, and we're going to find out why in a moment. He's the host of the Wine of the Week program on WTOP in Washington, D.C., as well as the Vine Guy podcast. Scott started his career in wine journalism with the Washington Journal newspaper and continues to contribute to Tastings Panel magazine. He's also hosted numerous wine tastings, judged lots of wine competitions, and he's even taught a course on North American wineries for the Smithsonian Associates in Washington, which is really cool. Scott is a Touquelin vineyard expert, or specialist, I should say, and an Italian wine scholar. He recently moved from Maryland to Park City, Utah, where he lives with his wife, Cindy, and a rescue dog named Frankie. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening, Scott. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Natalie. It's so wonderful to be here, and hopefully Frankie won't butt in.
Okay,
so
yes.
We'll see
what
happens.
You did give me the snowplow warning, so if we hear him, he's not in trouble, but he's very excited about the snowplow. All right, so let's start, Scott, with kind of how did you get into wine? What was the moment when you realized, wow, I want to make wine what I do full time?
So many of my friends have that aha moment when they're like, oh my God, this is wine. And I had the same thing. It was back in 1994. My day job is I'm an insurance advisor. I run an insurance advisory firm in Washington, D.C. And there was this one tax attorney who was very famous, and I really wanted to get to know him. But it was impossible to get on his schedule. He was just fully booked, always booked, couldn't get any time with him. And then somebody told me that he was into wine. Now, I had no idea what into wine meant. I didn't know if he was bathing in wine. I didn't know, whatever. But I called his secretary and I said, hey, I know I've been trying to get on this guy's calendar, but it has nothing to do with insurance. I'm really super interested in wine. Do you think he would talk to me about wine? Well, within a week, I had a date with him and we met for lunch. And of course, I had no interest in wine. I just wanted to meet him. And it turned out that as he spoke about wine, it became a living, breathing thing for me. And I really was curious. And he said, listen, I can tell you all about wine, but you really have to taste it. I'm hosting a dinner party this weekend for my new partner. Would you and your wife like to come over? Come on. I mean, Natalie, this was holy grail stuff
absolutely.
For me. I'm being invited to his home for dinner. And again, no interest in wine, but I was going to form a relationship. We get to his house. My wife, who is not the most social creature in the world, says, okay, but you owe me. We get there. And it turns out that this dinner party is 3 couples. Okay. It's Jim and his wife, his new partner and his wife, and Cindy, my wife, and myself. And he goes downstairs and he pulls up this bottle and sort of, blows off the dust and whatever and opens it up. And he goes around and he pours everybody a glass. And as he comes to me, I said to Jim, the attorney's name, I said, Jim, I don't need a glass. I'll just share with my wife. And she looked over at me and went,
no, not sharing.
Nope. You're going to want your own glass. And he poured a glass and I tasted it. And Natalie, it's not hyperbole when I tell you that this wine changed my life. it literally changed my life for several reasons. One of which is it has cost me thousands of dollars in wine purchasing since then. But Jim has since become one of my dearest, closest friends. It has started me on a path to wine that has led me to you today, which I'm thrilled about. And the wine, for those of everybody who's wondering what it was a 1981 Chateau de Beaucastel from
From the
Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
Rhone Valley. Oh my
And
gosh, yeah.
from the Rhone Valley. And I can taste it to this day.
What did it
And
taste like to you?
It
What
really,
memories do you have of it?
well, I remember turning to Jim and saying, I didn't know wine could taste like this. And he said, with a twinkle in his eye, because he's mischievous, he said, oh, but it can. It just costs, it just costs a little bit more.
Yes.
So it tasted like saddle leather. I remember very distinctly getting this saddle leather and kind of this wonderful earthy tone to it. And I'd never experienced anything like that in a wine before. I mean, well, first of all, I don't think I'd ever had wine out of a bottle before.
That's quite a step up.
Yeah, so it was just, it was ethereal. And as I said, it really started me on a path that I'm very grateful for to this
Did
day.
you take courses, or what did you do next after you sort of had that aha moment?
Well, I started buying
Okay.
books and I started reading books, and I did take a very interesting course, a 101 type of a course that was incredibly helpful, that taught me how to identify what I thought I was tasting in my head or what I was smelling. And it was very valuable in terms of being able to sort of delineate those descriptors.
That's great. Wow.
But the wine books were really the best.
Is there a favorite wine book of those from those early days?
Well, the first one's always your favorite,
sure.
right? I think Windows on the World by Kevin Zraeli is still to this day something I go back and visit
That's
often.
a great book. Really great resource. So, sort of moving forward now, what would you say has been one of the highlights of your wine career so far?
Oh, today.
Oh, today.
Absolutely, meeting
you. Are
you.
so sweet. You caught me off guard.
This is it. I don't know how it gets any better.
Aw, well,
It's kind of the pinnacle.
that's a plant. No, thank you, Scott. That's very nice. Okay.
But in a close second, given that we just lost Stephen Spurrier recently, I did have the pleasure of having dinner with Stephen about 18 months ago before the world shut down in San Francisco. So that was really quite memorable.
He was a real leading
and I
light
was actually
in the wine world. And for
He
those
was,
who don't
and
know
he
him,
was-
tell us a little bit about him.
He's really probably the most famous for what we know as the movie Bottle Shock, where he hosted a tasting of French wines and California wines that rocked the world. I believe it was called, if I'm not mistaken, Tasting of
Yes,
Paris.
The Judgment of Paris, but yes, tasting. Absolutely.
Judgment of Paris.
1976. That's right. Blind tasting.
Yep.
Lining them up.
Blind tasting, right? Where I believe Chateau Montelena's Chardonnay beat out all the
French,
white
yeah.
Burgundies. Yeah, and it rocked the world, and it literally started a wine revolution. And he loves talking about it, and it was really great. Matter of fact, I interviewed him in the back of a limo that we shared to the airport
great.
for my podcast, and I was so excited about it. And the file got corrupted,
Oh, no.
and I was never able to recover it.
At least
But
you have the memory.
so
Yeah.
so that was a close second. But Natalie, this is the
You're
highlight.
so sweet. Okay, so let's talk about the fundraiser that you've been involved in. How did that start? And what is
Oh wow, so my wine world started in, as I said, in 1994, and in 1996, 97, 98, in that range, I started buying wine, and I started buying futures. I started buying, really exploring a lot of different things. Like, I kind of sort of cut my teeth on those big Australian Shiraz in the day, and then kind of, migrated over to California and never lost my love for Rhone wines. That was always sort of the top. But I stuck my toe in the water with Bordeaux futures at some point, and I was buying from a local wine shop in Washington, D.C. when the owner's son, who I had become very close with, matter of fact, we were getting ready to go to the Union de Grand Cru,
Which is a big tasting of
passed
futures,
away.
right? And
Yeah, big tasting
and
of
futures
futures.
being wine that's in the barrel but hasn't been bottled yet. So you really are tasting wine before it's even complete, so to speak. It is kind of buying the future.
Absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out, because I forget that I will geek out
That's okay.
sometimes
We all love to
and,
geek out.
and forget who I'm talking to. But yes, so we were getting ready to go to the Union of Grand Cru to taste some of the futures in barrel. And Bruce suddenly passed away of a heart attack at the age of 40. 3 young children, a lovely wife, and I was devastated. And so I was on the board of the American Heart Association at the time and decided, let's do something in his honor just to raise a little bit of money. And we planned, myself and a few other people got together, and we decided what we would do is a Bordeaux tasting in my living room. And, our goal was to raise $15,000 to be able to buy a defibrillator for the airport, which at the time airports didn't have defibrillators at the gates. And I think if there was a defibrillator, Bruce, while waiting for his plane, may be alive today. But so that was the start of it. And we said, well, let's do this fundraiser. And my phone rings one day, and I pick it up and I'm like, hello. And he's like, hey, Scott, this is Bob. I heard you're doing this fundraiser for Bruce. I'd really like to get involved. What are you thinking about doing? I said, we're going to get a few bottles of Bordeaux. We're going to open them up because Bruce loved Bordeaux. We'll have a few people over. We'll charge admission, and we'll see if we can raise a few bucks. And he said, well, I think I could really help you. Maybe I can get some of the Bordelais to actually come over with their wines and have a tasting and put on a tasting for you. And I said, well, Bob, that's great. That's amazing. But, my living room's not that big. It's like, we were thinking about 35 people. And he said, well, I think we might need a bigger venue. And I said, well, Bob, how are you going to get these people over here? We can't afford to fly them over. I mean, he goes, no. They'll come over on their own. They'll bring their wines. Everything will be gratis. I said, how are you planning on doing this? Who are you?
Bob must be connected.
He said, well, I have this. Bob's connected, right? I'm like, who the hell's Bob? Like, at this point, I'm like, starting to get either a little paranoid or a little annoyed. I couldn't remember which. Like, dude, who are you? And he said, well, I have this newsletter called The Wine Advocate.
Uh-huh.
Bob? Robert Parker?
Wow, the renowned U.S. critic.
It was Robert
Holy
Parker.
Smokes. Yes.
And I'm like, and okay, Natalie, this is how flipped out I was. I am so embarrassed to tell you this story, but this is how flipped out I was when he called. I said, Robert Parker? And he said, yeah. And I said, how did you get this number?
That's great. That's an honest response. Fantastic.
And the rest, as they say, is history. The event started in 1999. Obviously, it did not start in my living room. We actually had to find a ballroom at the last minute.
That's great.
We raised $117,000 that year, which was amazing.
Wow. First shot, yeah.
And Heart's Delight, in its 20th year, we raised over $20 million for the American Heart Association.
Bravo.
And
wow.
Bob and I developed a wonderful relationship over that
fantastic.
time. He was very gracious by hosting the first 10 years. He stepped in and did the panels. It was great.
Scott, that's a great story. Oh my goodness.
Very proud of it.
Very fantastic. Proud of it. Well done. And is there any relation to that event and how you got the name Vine Guy, the Vine Guy?
Yeah, more embarrassing stories.
Great. I love these.
So, as I said, Bob and I started to develop, Robert Parker. I started to develop a relationship. And he took me to a few wine tastings with him. And I'll never forget, one of the tastings we went to was a California barrel sample, where a lot of the California winemakers had sent barrel samples out to Bob, and he invited me to come along and taste with him, which was a great experience to begin with. But Bob would take, and he would just run through 20 wines at a time. As I recall, there were maybe about 100 wines. So there were 5 flights, 20
So he
wines
was
each.
tasting them. He was going that fast.
He was just tasting them. I was tasting it, taking a note, tasting it, taking a note, tasting it, taking a note. And he was getting annoyed. He was like, really? Because he was just, right, exactly. He was just tasting them through. And then he would go back and then selectively taste others. And then he would write his notes. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
And did he have any sort of technique
But
that you noticed? Like, was he doing one nose, then the other nose, or anything like that you noticed?
Both noses.
Okay, both nostrils, I should say.
He was in there. Both nostrils, right. No, he was in there deep. No, but it was amazing how, I think just how fast he was, but how incredibly accurate he was. Now, of course, he'd had years of experience and I was still a newbie. But at one point, he looks over at my notes and like a kid in high school or something, I went to cover.
Don't look at my homework. It might be wrong.
and he looked at me and he said, really?
Oh no. Oh.
I was like, really? It's kind of like, I'm Robert Parker. I'm like, you know what? So that day at lunch, I actually did share my notes with him and he read them and he said, Scott, you should actually start writing. Wow. These notes are great. There's something here. And I would really encourage you. He said, you should get a website and just start posting stuff.
Wow.
Now, back then, by the way, Natalie, there was no blog. This is still pretty early on in, the early 2000s where you actually had to write away for a website name to one location that issued all the website names. And I said, well, Bob, that's great, but what would I call the website? And he said, The Vine Guy.
He named you.
That was it. That's how I got the moniker.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how it happened.
And so do you still taste? Do you still see him at all? Or I know he's retired, so...
yeah, no, I haven't seen Bob in about 5 years.
You moved too, so
it's been a while.
Okay, wow, what great experiences from Stephen Spurrier to Robert Parker. Holy smokes.
And to Natalie McLean.
Oh, well, just thank you. Let's go to a special dinner you had. Now, this may be backtracking, I'm not sure, where they were pouring a particular champagne. Tell me about that.
No, that actually did happen afterwards. Okay. As again, my friend Jim was hosting a wine dinner and had invited several of his friends. He was already in a tasting group and he wanted to introduce me to the group as a new member, if you will. And I was really thrilled. I mean, this was kind of like, oh my gosh, this would be so much fun. And everybody's supposed to bring a special bottle of wine. I actually, at that time, still didn't have a very deep collection, so I had to purchase one from Jim to bring to this dinner. And this fellow brings a 1985 Ceylon champagne. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ceylon is, I think, probably one of the premier champagnes available. And the 85 was a spectacular vintage. But I'm a knucklehead, and I don't know anything about champagne other than it's got bubbles. And I take a look at the bottle and I whisper to Jim, who's the guy who brought the old champagne? I thought this was supposed to be a special dinner. I'm not drinking that.
You don't want that.
The old stuff, right? And Jim's like, well, you may want to try it before you. And again, it was another one of those aha moments, Natalie, where I remember very clearly tasting that wine and thinking, wow, how does it taste like that? What have I been missing all my life?
What did it taste like to you?
And oh my gosh, it tasted like fresh baked bread. And it was crisp. But it also kind of had this slightly maderized edge, that sherry-esque edge, which I adore. I adore. But a little bit of like maybe dried apricot, a little bit of maybe super, super ripe nectarine. It was just, but it was the balance, the acidity and the bubbles and the way that this wine swooned in the mouth.
Nice.
And it was just delicious. And again, love being wrong.
That's great. That's
And
excellent.
since then, I've become kind of a, I don't know if this is a family show, but kind of a champagne whore.
You'll
Just
drink, you'll
really,
try anything,
oh
no
yeah,
matter what age
yeah,
it
I'm,
is.
I'm pretty much,
But you know,
and fortunately, so is my wife.
that's great. But they say that aged champagne, well, first of all, a lot of people think all bubbly should be served fresh, and certainly there's lots of delight in that. But they also say
Yeah,
aged champagne is an acquired taste. I don't know if the British started it or whatever, but it's quite a different experience. It can be, as you say, a bit
it
maderized, a
is.
bit nutty, but
It
yeah,
was.
but
Yeah.
I think it's worth exploring. It's a rare treat too to even be able to try vintage, like old champagne, old mature champagne.
Right.
Reminds me of the Steve
But
Martin skit where he says, "Don't bring me that old stuff. I want a fresh wine." That's great.
that's right. I remember that. And that was very similar. And again, the gentleman who brought that champagne and I have become the dearest of friends. And as a matter of fact, of the many special bottles I've had the privilege of tasting, most of them have been with him.
Nice. Wow. Lots of
So,
friendships
yeah,
formed over good bottles. That's great.
absolutely.
You have another time where you met someone while you were skiing in Deer Valley. Where is Deer Valley, first of all?
Deer Valley's in Park City,
Oh, okay.
Utah. It's one of the mountains.
Yeah.
There's Deer Valley is a kind of a neighborhood, if you will, inside Park
Okay.
City, and it's absolutely a wonderful, wonderful place to ski. Just great. And I was taking a break one day from skiing just to grab a bite to eat. And I'm standing in line to get some food, and I start talking to the guy behind me, and I was like, oh, where are you from? I'm from Chicago. Where are you from? I'm from the DC area. Oh, what do you do? And he said, oh, I'm into wine. Now, by this time, I knew what into wine meant.
The years, yes.
It's like, I no longer knew that he was bathing in wine. So I said, oh, what end of the business are you in? And he said, well, we do both importing and distribution. I said, oh, that's pretty cool. Who do you work for? He said, well, I'm John Turlato.
Oh, wow.
Like,
And
oh,
explain for those who may not
oh.
know that name, who he is.
Right. John Turlato of the Turlato Wine Group. I think they're definitely top 10, maybe top five importers, distributors in the United States. And, such notable wines, for example, as Gaia from
Italy,
Italy. Very
up
top
here.
tier wine,
Yeah.
as you probably know. And even their own brand. So John is, believe, a third generation in the business and now runs it with his brother. And it was just funny because the week before, the Turlato Wine Group had sent out a PR package to 10 people in the country, which included several bottles of their wine and a pizza oven that you put on the grill and
Oh,
make
wow.
pizza. And I said, wait, you're John Turlato? I just got one of your pizza ovens. And he said, wait, you got a pizza oven? I said, yeah. And he goes, you got a pizza oven. Like, I felt like I was in The Godfather or something. It's like, you got one of them. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, who are you again? And that was it. We were off and running and became good friends. John became a wonderful sponsor of Heart's Delight, the
Charity,
charity
yes.
we talked
Yeah.
about, donating wines and donating really some special treats and visits. And again, you just meet the
Well,
most
you
wonderful
tend
people
to
through
stumble into
wine.
them when when you're not looking, but
I do. I mean,
fortunately, you strike up these conversations wherever you are. But and
I'm a friendly guy.
yes, yes, you are. Very nice guy. And did you interview John on your podcast? Is that right?
He was actually my very
Oh,
first
wow,
guest. He
fantastic.
he I told John that I was starting this
Yeah.
podcast. He said, "Let me know if I could help." I said, "Help? How about if you're my first guest?" And to this day, it's one of the top 3 downloaded interviews on the
Oh,
podcast, which
oh,
is now going into its second year.
terrific.
So
I'll have to go back and take a
uh,
listen to that one.
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, you have a great radio podcast voice. So you were in a
Why, thank you,
well,
Natalie.
I'm not even going to try. You have a great voice. But sometime, at one time, you were in a restaurant and somebody recognized your voice, which is pretty uncanny. It's one thing to be spotted, but to have your voice recognized. What happened there?
Well, due to the radio show on WTOP, which you know, not to be immodest, it's the largest terrestrial radio station in the Washington D.C.
Wow.
area, so gets a lot of airplay.
Great.
The fellow at the table next to us at the restaurant said, "Hey, wait a minute. I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you that guy on the radio I hear every Friday?" And this annoys my wife to no end because my ego is big enough and she does not want it going any bigger. And I'm like, well, yes, I am. I happen to be that very same fellow who's on the radio every Friday. And he said, "Listen, I've been wanting to meet you. We're getting together. We're having a wine dinner. And we have a very special guest. And I'd love it if you would be my guest. I'd love to introduce you to some of my friends who are, again, into wine." I love that phrase. And I said, that's great. Do I need to bring anything? I goes, "Oh, no. We're having a winemaker, and he's going to bring all the wines. We're just going to, and I'll cover your charges. Don't worry. I just want you to be my guest." Well, turns out that the special guest was Christian Moex from France, who is responsible for both Petrus, a very well-known Bordeaux wine, top tier. I certainly can't afford it.
Neither can I.
And Dominus in Napa.
Again, top tier.
And
Wow.
Christian was there with his wife, and I sat right next to them and had a remarkably wonderful experience. Charming people and delicious wines. And I came home that evening, worse the wear, if you can imagine.
Sure.
It was a slow day
You're
the
not
next
gonna
day.
spit when you're tasting those wines. Please. That would be rude.
Natalie, I didn't spit. I didn't spit a single glass. And I said to my wife, "And that, my dear, is what my radio voice gets me."
Did she give you a roll of the eyes?
Actually, she just suggested I sleep in the
Oh,
next
I
room.
see. Okay. Oh, poor Cindy. No. So,
Exactly. My long-suffering wife.
so was it the tasting, or it was a dinner? But how many different wines were you tasting? Was it kind of like in flights, or?
Oh,
How
it was by course. I want to say that we had, best recollection was 4 courses, and we just had amazing pairings. So probably over the course of the evening, there were 8 or 10 wines that we
Was there a
had.
But, pairing that
catches
stood
up
out
with
for you that you remember?
Yeah, I think definitely the lamb loin with the Petrus, and I apologize, I cannot recall the vintage
That's okay.
of the Petrus, but it was. I'm super into pairings. I'm obsessed with pairings.
Great.
Natalie, I'm obsessed with pairings.
This is great.
You have found your
totally
people.
Into pairings. So what is it about wine pairing that you love most?
I think that's easy. I think wine enhances the food and food enhances the wine.
Absolutely.
And the problem that I have with some wines is, and I love all God's children. I really do. I drink and enjoy a lot of different styles of wine. But what I really look for the most in a wine is, what can I pair it with? Is it food friendly? And yeah, occasionally I'll drink a wine just on its own for the sake of drinking a wine. But I really, really enjoyed wine with food. And now I have 3 adult children who I've now converted into that philosophy. For example, being St. Patrick's Day, we're having shepherd's pie tonight, and we are obsessing over what wine do you have with shepherd's pie. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I'm leaving it up to my kids to see where they come down
Are there
on
some
this.
candidates, or what would you suggest if you were in charge? Like which wines would you be thinking of with shepherd's pie? Because it's got the either beef or lamb and then some vegetables and then that potato crust. So where would you go with that?
Well, particularly if it's lamb, I'm going to go to my old friend, Southern Rhone, back to Chateauneuf-du-Pape.
Yes.
Just because I think that's for me, the most versatile wine I've got in my cellar.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.